Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, so we're very pleased to have Tanzim Chowdhury. Did I pronounce your last name right?
Chowdhury
here from Dartmouth. She is at her soul a Media Lab person though, right? And you might even be able to guess from her title who her thesis advisor was, but Sandy Pentland. So, and how, I should know your history. I'm going to ask you your history and repeat it. That's kind of stupid. Okay. So I won't, but she's great. And she's going to be talking about inferring social networks automatically from sensor data.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so I started at Dartmouth about a year ago, and previous to that I was at Intel, and previous to that at Media Lab. So there is a kind of a continuation of my work and some new stuff. So today I'll focus mostly on my work on inferring social network, but I'll touch upon a little bit, give you a broader picture of what my general research is about. So generally, I work on using mobile sensors to interpret human behavior. You can see I started with this big clunky device for my PhD thesis. This is what I transitioned to while I was at Intel. So devices are getting smaller. There are more sensors and more powerful processors. But what I'm interested in is really kind of looking at how we can learn models of human behavior. And one of the reasons I prefer using mobile devices are they're usually lightweight, they're continuously with the user, as opposed to sensors that are mounted in the environment. The sensors go with you, so you can really have a 24/7 view of what the user is doing. And it also has an advantage of being within the user's control. So someone can turn it off if they want to, and that's often huge in terms of privacy. Just having an off button makes a big difference sometimes. But we're kind of transitioning to using mobile phones, because the previous device that was up there had 7 types of sensors. It had a microphone, it had accelerometer to detect movement, it had light, temperature, it could detect air pressure, a compass. And if you think about it, an iPhone or a lot of smartphones have pretty much the same set of sensors. And what I work on is how can you take this sensor data and look at interpreting various types of routines in a person's lives, or their activities, the social networks they belong to, the places they go to, and the conversational structures. And the applications of understanding human behavior and contexts are very broad and probably familiar to most of you here. One is you can make computers smarter. That's definitely the thing. You have location-aware systems. You can have systems that interact naturally with individuals, and you have systems that respond in a context-aware manner. The application domain that I'm particularly interested in is in improving quality of life. Our behaviors really provide a lot of clues about our well-being, our physical health, emotional health, cognitive health, and how can we, right now the measurement of human behavior outside the doctor's office is very, very poor. And how can we use sensors to really improve and provide a richer view of human behavior to the individuals as well as their caregivers or healthcare professionals. And just
I don't mean to be difficult, but I was just reading a Times article on the fact that people have a lot of trouble trying to define what a behavior is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know about this whole controversy, and how are you defining behavior?
No, that's a good question. So I'm looking at, usually right now, categorizing in actually looking at physical behavior, so physical activities that indicate physical wellness. So it's been kind of more derived from the health end. So what would you know to determine when someone is physically active? Whether it could be whether you clean your house through vacuuming, or just take a walk, take a stair, what kind of equipment you might be using in the gym. Also looking at social behavior, and where my focus mostly has been on looking at people's, how they interact, who they interact with, and how it changes over time. And the other one has been mostly from the elder care domain in terms of what I mentioned earlier, in activities of daily living. They actually have a very well-defined category of 14 classes of behavior they consider to be activities of daily living, whether you take care of your personal hygiene, your food, medication, even things like finance. So definitely I have a very narrowly defined view of what I mean by behavior, but also looking at where there has been results tying those behavior to real kind of measurements of quality of life. Okay, so, and along that thread, so if you look at it in terms of behavior patterns and what they reveal, one aspect of behavior I look at is conversations. And actually I primarily focus on not looking at the words, but just looking at the stylistic content of conversation. So we can extract certain features of an ongoing conversation, how much the person speaks, how fast or slow the person is speaking, and just intonation, how they go back and forth, turn taking, and interruptions. And all of these, through a lot of tedious manual coding, have been shown to result to a lot of things, a lot of emotional and just social states, emotions, people, whether kind of like depressive states, things in children with autism, they have social interaction style that are different from normal individuals, also things like status and dominance. So what I'd like to be able to do is that can we actually get to these behavioral measurements automatically and also relate to higher order information about how they might impact our well-being. And in order to do that, so there are definitely machine learning is a big component, and there's a lot of challenges of how do you learn these models from groups of people who are really different, and how do you evolve that model, and it requires us combining to, I'm a believer that you actually do need to have human in the loop, where the humans guide the learning process, because they are intelligent and they know a lot more, they have a lot more context to guide the system than a machine might have from the beginning, but you have to do that in a way that doesn't drive people crazy, right? So the usability is a big aspect, and what I like to try to combine in my research is trying to put these three things together. How do we learn models of human behavior, but engage the user in a way that is acceptable to them? So today I will mostly focus on, as I mentioned, the work that we've done in looking at modeling social networks, and there is a lot of work in modeling social network, and my work has focused on really looking at the networks that happen in the physical world through conversations. So and one of the goals is to say that there is a lot of analysis of links in the social network, but how do our behavior might impact the formation of those links? That's what kind of what I would like to drive at, and kind of through the work I'm doing. So given that, this is kind of how I'd like to proceed with the rest of my talk. Is I'll talk about modeling group behavior, give a description of the type of data that we collect, how we model the network, and also talk about how our behavior, connecting behavior of ours, how we interact with others, and how that might be indicative of macro level behavior in a social network. But then I'll also kind of briefly talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing in health and wellness. I structured the talk, since there's a lot more about social networks at this lab, so most of the focus is there, but I can also kind of, if there's interest, go a lot more into the health and wellness side, because that's something that my current research involves a lot of. So I started by asking the question, basically what I was, being a true Media Lab student, I guess, I wanted to figure out what makes people tick. Why are some people more well connected than others, or more influential? So social networks tell us that some people are hubs, but is there something about in person's behavior that might give us some cue? And if you think about it, that it is just going beyond kind of looking at presence or absence of link. And this actually a quote from The Tipping Point, which I thought was quite appropriate, and there's some reference actually of a scientific study that looking at how persuaders have traits that go beyond what they say, and there are these non-verbal cues that can characterize persuaders. There's also things about good people who are very good at marketing, and so I wanted to see if we can, through sensors and modeling of behavior, try to understand what are these cues, and can we actually quantify them and define them in some ways. Oh, it's a book by Malcolm Gladwell about kind of looking at how different social groups or certain phenomenons can create like a tipping point in a fad, or how there's things about fad, what makes a message sticky, or how can what makes a good salesman really sell a lot of product. So it's
just a phase transition.
So, and face-to-face conversations are important channel in developing social network, and that's but the current knowledge of face-to-face networks are growing, but it's still sparse. There's lots of studies of social networks on the web, email networks, Facebook networks, but not that much on conversational networks. But conversations are studied, but they're not studied together. So they're in terms of people looking at discourse analysis or meeting analysis. There's a lot of work in analyzing conversations, but they're not linked to kind of following a group around over an extended period of time. And the current methods are very kind of, in some ways, are a hodgepodge of different techniques, right? They're indirect observations through surveys and diaries. You get some proxy information. You often have direct human observers who actually observe people in action, which can be a very rich source of data, but again, that's really hard to scale up. So they're often expensive, and sometimes surveys are biased and approximate. So what we wanted to do is actually really do a longitudinal study of looking at interactions. So what we did in terms of the scale of a network, it's still small, but what we did, we instrumented 24 individuals over the course of 9 months. So these were actually first-year graduate students who, from the very first week that they came to campus, were instrumented so that we could actually measure before they before they have already formed links, and we measured, collected data 1 week every month for the first academic year. So there's 9 data, and we also collected survey data alongside. So looking at their research interest in collaborations, and also a survey of at the end of the week the amount of who they interacted with. Yeah.
Just as with the surveys, and possibly even more so, wouldn't there be a bias here because only certain types of people would agree to be followed in this way, I would think, right?
Absolutely.
Probably more social people than you typically get at MIT.
That's true. That's definitely true. And what we try to do is actually get as much of the group as possible. So there were actually 26 incoming graduate students that year, and we managed to convince 24. So we actually really worked hard but there were also bribes. They got no, this was at University of Washington while I was at Intel. Okay. Yeah. So slightly less odd, but still a computer science graduate student.
So these are CS students?
Yes, they were first-year CS graduate students, and there were that year there were 26 incoming students, and we got 24. Yeah.
I think it's just safer to make no pretense to generalizability and just say that you're trying
Absolutely. I don't think that in terms of, one of the things we did worry about, and which will come into play later on, is we're talking about things like network centrality, and we wanted to say that we have the whole group, right? So if we are making a statement about that social group, it was important for us to get as much of the group. So that's one of the reasons but I totally agree that any of the findings here are characteristics of that group, and we cannot I'm not going to make any statement about generalizing to the population at all. Yes?
And can you also give some more detail on when they were required to carry these instruments, and like what sort of conversations were recorded?
So, okay, yeah, they were, so this is how the kind of incentive system worked. It was recorded, it was the second of the kind of two custom wearable device that you saw, so slightly smaller. It was like 3 by 2 inches. So they were encouraged to wear it when they were coming to work, and wear it, turn it off when they left. There was a varying amount of data different subjects collected because you could turn it off. So on average, we got, I think, 6.5, I have that number, per day per subject, so that's an average. So there is a high variance. They were encouraged to keep it on all the time. We do not record, and I didn't go into the detail, but we don't record the raw audio. I will actually talk about it. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we collect the data. And what was your other question?
So I mean, you can already assume, just aside from just the selection bias in your sample, just the discretionary procedure that individuals would have on things that they want to talk about with strangers and with friends, with like this thing where they're recording every word you're saying.
Yeah, so it's not recording every word we're saying. We actually, as I mentioned, we don't record the words. We actually just record the kind of stylistic nature, and I'll actually describe how we do that. And the other thing is that they definitely, there is a bias that they can turn it off. We did do an informal survey in terms of how much it affected their behavior. They were aware the first week that they wore it, but after a time, the whole department, and they were so used to it that they told us that they did not notice it. But it's still, again, it was an informal survey. It wasn't from the entire group of people. I think it was about 50% of the individuals. So yes, there is a selection bias. And one of the goals here is actually how much can we measure about the network, and that's been one of the driving factor. I wouldn't say this is a complete study of a network 24/7, but it's saying how much can we push with sensors and what level of information we can get. So it's actually coming right now about how we record. That was the first question. You're going to record me 24/7, and then I think we would not have gotten half of our subject, or less than half of our subject. But one of the things that the field of ubiquitous computing is about kind of computing everywhere, and one of oftentimes these devices and sensors are used for recording but not for computing. So one of the areas we wanted to push is that why don't we actually use the capabilities of these sensors that come with processors and storage to actually do more than that. So what we did is what we call like privacy-sensitive processing of speech, which is a very, very simple kind of, in some way, a trick or a gimmick, right? So if you think about how speech production work, you have airflow from the lungs, and then your vocal tract, so you have these voiced and unvoiced source. When you're uttering vowels, you have this periodic pitch, which is voiced, otherwise you have kind of almost white noise. Your vocal tract filter shapes it, which creates phonemes and words. Now, if we get rid of this shaping, we lose information about phonemes. So, but we still have this information about human pitch and the rate of pitch, which actually controls the rate of speaking and the various intonational attributes of conversation. So that's exactly what we did, that we stored only information about the paralinguistic content, but through our information that might help us recreate speech. So when we were recording, it never recorded audio. It recorded certain features that will help us extract things like the pitch profile, looking at speaking rate, how loud a person is speaking, how they do when you have multi-party conversation, how they are doing turn taking, what fraction of time they speak. So a lot of aspect of how someone's speaking, but not what they're saying. Yeah.
This kind of information tends to be independent of the language?
So any language that has kind of these voice signal and actually pitch, right? So things like if you have like click languages and things, it wouldn't work. But they were dominantly, so I tested it with, we have the dominant group were Americans, English speaking, or Indians and Chinese, and it does work. Yeah.
So you use this procedure to sort of classify speech. I mean, you wouldn't need more information like classify speech, for example, if they talk about sport or other things. Couldn't you like extract certain keywords at least?
We could, but we didn't. Yes.
It's about work.
Yes, we could, but we didn't explicitly because we wanted it to be as comfortable. We are asking someone to record like 24/7, wear a microphone. So we actually, there was this kind of delicate balance of how much can we collect and how much will like just actually make it so unpleasant that we'll just kind of turn off people. Yeah.
For example, if you had a woman speaker, you could
Yes.
realize that if she lowers the pitch of her voice, she's talking about science.
I told most of the people in the lab that I lost my voice. I found out because I was lowering the pitch whenever I would lecture about science.
Oh, really?
Apparently, this is a common problem with women scientists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they
Oh.
lower, they like.
They try
lower
to be more male-like.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Okay. No, does it overlap with male pitch?
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, they sent me. I got nodules, and they sent me to a speech therapist. And she's like, "You're a woman scientist, right?"
And I can also tell whether Jennifer talks to cats or little children, because then her voice is actually higher.
But yeah, you can tell gender from the information we collect. Yeah.
So were people given feedback about this sort of thing? So it's like, and now this is what your voice sounds like, blah, 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 blah. Or was it just trusting you that you gave them like this slide and said, here's what we do? And they go, okay, that makes sense.
Well, we did that, and there were CS students, and we said, here's our code as well. And but we later on did actually with a colleague of mine who does a lot of user studies, actually played back that if you try to resynthesize speech from the information we store, this is how it would sound like, and actually looked at people's feeling about privacy. So choice, would you give us the data if we recorded audio, if we recorded this, or do you never want to any audio information? So it's still kind of definitely overwhelmingly people, and there weren't participants in this study, overwhelmingly prefer this over raw audio, but there's still like, oh, so you can get emotion, which we can, you can get gender, and there is still concern about even the level of information we collect, and not everybody in the general population would be willing. And our subjects also had monetary compensation. They got a smartphone. They got, I think, $600 over the course of a year. For a graduate student, that was enough. Yeah.
So your subjects are mic'd, the people that they're talking to are not. How
Excellent question.
specific did they have to be in order to get a good?
Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details of that, but that's kind of one of the stepping stones we had to kind of go through. So we did some work on saying how can you identify multi-party conversations where a subset of your individuals are mic'd and not mic'd, and we can do that, and the quality varies based on what fraction of your subjects are mic'd. So if you have, let's say, 8 individuals and 2 are mic'd, our quality is in the range of like 50-60%. If you have 5 individuals where 3 is mic'd, you can do much better. So we do, that's one of our pre-processing steps exactly does that. And I'm not going into the detail. I can go over the specifics later on, but I won't be able to kind of cover that and get to. But this is kind of, and actually some of the earlier work based on the work that Sumit Basu did, who's a Microsoft researcher, and for his PhD thesis, but we built upon that in terms of he actually looked at certain robust features in terms of detecting human voice. And we utilized that and built on top of that in order to, but he was looking at basically dyadic conversation, 2% or over the phone conversation where you actually only have two, but what we did was actually extend beyond that and looking at multi-party conversation. So I'm just going to show you a result of how we segment. So basically, if we have streams of, let's say we have 3 microphones that we know that are present, and how we characterize others in the conversation is we say there's someone else speaking or there's no one speaking. So we actually don't differentiate. We possibly could try to cluster that, but we say we don't differentiate from the unmiked others. So there might be 5 unmiked others or there might be 2 unmiked others. We don't care, and that's also part of our human subjects agreement, because we are not allowed to try to differentiate individuals that are not we don't have informed consent from. So this is a ground truth of a chunk of 65 seconds of data where it's showing you when, in this case, unfortunately I should pick a better example, where there's no someone else, but it's showing when no one's speaking, A, B, or C is speaking, and this is the output of our probabilistic model where higher intensity means more probable, so red is most likely when here no one is speaking. So you can see that it closely higher probability, and blue is lower probability. So if you can,
High probability C is speaking and then C is red there.
yeah. So if you're trying to pick the model here, you pick it with the highest probability in this column, right? So it would be C, the highest probability corresponding to C here. There's some areas where it's more model is more confident than others. Here you can see that it's less confident.
A, B, and C are 3 different mic speakers.
Exactly.
And they never speak at the same time?
That is a good question. They do. In this case, you can see that there is overlap in this conversation. But right now, we are actually not explicitly modeling interruptions. We just kind of switch from A to B, and we don't measure how much time that there is overlap. That's something that is also another interesting aspect to look at.
It would be very interesting if I interrupt somebody versus I just ignore me go on or versus I stop.
Exactly. So we probably currently our model would probably just switch back and forth. Right now it would switch, but that is definitely interesting. But we haven't kind of looked at really separating that to a great detail. Yep, but you're right. It would switch. So in the end, this is kind of what we would get. So this is showing you 5 days. It's the y-axis is showing the time in the day, so 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. Each bar is showing you the conversations. The width is showing you the size of the group, and the colors are redundant. They also correspond to the size of the group. So you can kind of get a week-long pictures of what's happening, of all the conversations that are going on among those 24 individuals. And you can see that this was actually UW had a Friday afternoon TGIF for a tea. So there's lots of small conversations going on. And actually Tuesdays and Thursdays are when their colloquium happens. So also you can see a lot more. And you see that these were first-year graduate students who had this one of their core courses Tuesday and Thursday morning. So you can get a flavor of the conversations that go on, but also looking at within a conversation how the dynamics is occurring. So here it's showing you the blue is the other, and this is 3 and 16, that how this is showing the probability. So basically when 3 and 16 are talking and there is someone else present in the conversation, you can also, but at the same time you can look at individuals separately. So each blob here is an individual, and each line is showing you a pair, and the length is showing you how long they interact. The angle is showing you whether they interact one-on-one or in groups. So the shallow angles means they interact in one-on-one and small groups, and the larger angles indicate that they interact in large groups. So whether they actually spend any time one-on-one or only they spend time when they're in larger groups. So you can see that these are the different individuals in our study, and you can see very different characteristics in that. There are some people who are extremely social, and there are some people who are not, and even in terms of the types of conversations they can have. So there's a wide range of conversational patterns that we even saw.
And what is going across there if it's very broad? Is that the amount of time?
Yes, the length is the amount of time. So some people only have short conversations and others have long extended conversations.
This is the time average over the entire period?
Yes, this is the time average over the entire period. Okay. So, but the data that I've showed you so far is not really measuring kind of social ties. It's showing you local just behavior, how much, who talks to who. And one of the things that we'd like to do is kind of tie that into really build a network model or a probabilistic model about the ties. And that's where we were going. That from conversations we want to go to networked. We haven't. Yeah. Pardon? Yes.
So the role of the state is, I got a little bit of the picture about. What does it mean that you cannot observe friendship in the head?
So this is through sensors, right? There is not, like currently, sensors aren't, it's measuring conversations or whether you're talking to each other. It cannot say, like the notion of a friend is a lot richer than that. So we're saying that you don't know whether someone, or even like, if you have a conversation with someone for 5 minutes, are they your friend, or you have to have multiple conversations, or do you have to have lots of friends in common to be friends, right?
What I'm saying is, so how do we know? So it may be that certain frequencies or alternation of frequency is related to friendship, and somebody has not picked it up, and so we have not realized that there is a correlation. So are you saying that you have not observed a correlation, or you can prove that there is no correlation, therefore you cannot infer friendship?
Well, we are saying that the actual friendship structure is hidden, and we want to take our observation and maybe some characteristics of just networks to actually build, infer a graph that is the most likely network structure that our data supports. So the network structure we are assuming is hidden. We want to infer a latent structure from our observations.
So perhaps you want to say can't seem to observe friendships directly.
So for instance, my good friends, unfortunately, I talk very little.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean that they're not friends. So, and maybe, however, if you record a certain, even if you filter some information,
No, absolutely.
it may be there but not observable. So one thing is to say, I have a measurement that shows a direct correlation between this and this, and I don't see a correlation, but or this is some more. There is another model in which you can prove that according to this model there is no friendship here, or you cannot tell me.
Friendship is a
No.
construct of your mind. It's about what you think of the strength of the tie and the meaning of it.
Right.
What she's saying is that you can't actually infer meaning even through behavioral data. For example, I spend a lot more time with people in this room than my mother. I cannot infer that I think of my mother less than the people in this room, just because of behavioral information. So just because you can get certain kind of behavioral structure from this kind of data, which is super valuable and has a structure of its own, don't infer people's interpretations or feelings.
But it could be that you speak in a different voice to my mother, she could conclude from that it's a friend.
It could be that we see the data, but we don't see. So that's what
Perhaps,
I'm
but I'm saying that you actually have to have some sort of even ground truth to even get at that.
Yep.
And even modeling ground truth for perception of ties has been a big struggle in sociology. So one of the things is no matter what, you are informing a structure, but you can't automatically just go from that structure to this, even if you have some measures that might be more likely for certain cases. You just don't automatically assume that without that kind of ground truth.
That goes without. I agree. But what I'm saying, but in such a case, what can we? It could be that to put it to an extreme, whatever we observe is not really semantically rooted very much, right? Right?
Is there ever
Well-
a case where you can observe a friendship directly with this data?
We can't observe a friendship directly with this
Is there
data.
ever a case where you could observe that? Maybe is the question.
And that's what she's trying to do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
She's trying, she's got this behavioral structure there. She'll try to infer a friendship structure, and then I assume you ask people or something.
Exactly. Then we try to correlate it with the survey data. But it's still the case that from the behavioral data and the level of analysis we are doing, it's really hard to say that this person is an acquaintance who I spend a lot of time with versus this person is a really good friend of mine who I spend 5 minutes with.
So I actually think you're doing yourself a pretty good favor by restricting to this graduate student population. We sort of don't have power dynamics. You don't have the kinship relations that Dana is talking about, right? So friendships are sort of a thing that you might expect to be characterized by frequent local geographic interaction, whereas the mom thing is sort of external to that. And I think if the thing that Dana was talking about would be a problem if what Bernie was saying before wasn't true, right? Like if you were trying to generalize to an overall population, then what Dana was saying, you're sort of doing yourself a favor here, I think.
And that was by design. We actually did do it by design, and possibly, and this is actually kind of because most of the time people get really upset by saying that if we do observe friendship, so it's a negative reaction, which is great. So if you say I can observe friendship, I'd be happy. No, but most of the time the notion is that we are not reading people's mind and we don't know intention. These are observation, and they can have many different interpretation, and that's kind of basically what this is alluding to. That it could be interpreted many ways, and I'm not going to make a claim that this is purely friendship. Yep.
You made the observation that first year CS grad students don't actually have friends.
True.
They're friends now.
Okay, so what we're trying to get at is that we have conversations, right? And we just have kind of patterns of conversations. My color is not showing up very well. And from that, we have a whole group of people who are interacting, and what we want to do is infer the network structure. So in this case, what we're trying to say that we have the observation, and we want to say what's the most likely network structure that supports these observations. And these are links, and they could be friendship, they could be they're just links in our kind of interpretation. Yeah. What is the motivation of doing that? Yes. So one of the things is I want to say, as I said from the very beginning, I'm going to come back and relate it to behavior. How does our behavior guide the links that we form? And actually low level, how we speak and how we speak with others, how we cause others to change their behavior when they speak to me or anyone in the network. Is there any connection with the structural properties? Because that is not very well understood in terms of, for example, can I know that given the way if there was a sensor measuring me, that how I would fit into an organization, or am I the leader type, or who are the others who are leader type, and how am I different? Are there behavioral characteristics that are different? Yeah.
So do you see these characteristics as being inherent to individuals or characteristic of relations?
They are characteristic of, well, that's a good question. We have explored more deeply characteristics of individuals. We haven't looked too deeply in looking at kind of relationships, partly because also that requires a lot more observations of a certain relationship type, where we have lots of conversations, but per pair, like conversations are a lot more limited. Okay. All right. So I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. So what we...
You can go until 5:30 or so.
Oh, okay. All right. No.
Although you're talking to mathematicians, so we'll be slowing you down.
No, that's...
And then the sociologist will be slowing you down too, but in a different way.
So what we do, and this is a very common model that's used in kind of looking at social networks, is exponential kind of random graph model, where you're trying to infer a graph from certain observations, and you're weighting those observations, and those observations are often kind of in social network trying to be designed to be socially intuitive. And what I mean by socially intuitive, very, very common features that are used in exponential random graph is density and triangles. So basically, human social networks aren't very dense. They're not fully connected. So you have usually, when you're looking at it, you have a negative weight for density, because you have certain density, and then you not get connected to everyone in the network, especially for large network. And the transitivity is just friends of friends. Yeah, you are. Do you have a question? Oh, no, you're skeptical.
No, I was. It's an interesting way of making it sparse by putting a negative weight for density. But that's.
Actually, that is learned. So typically, so you're learning the weights and you're defining the features. And from a lot of the kind of survey-based models of networks, that the density tends to be negative weight, because you do see sparsity in actual networks. And the transitivity is that you tend to connect to have lots of friends in common. Friends of friends are friends.
You don't allow with this model that you could have maybe higher density of triangles if you have high degree or something like that. So it's thinkable, right, if I look sort of at networks, that there's certain kinds of personalities which live more in triangles and other which are only...
Yes. Absolutely. Right now, no, we are not doing that. And we are actually, this is kind of a standard network model, and we're not actually doing exactly that. And actually, people do use much more nuanced notion of kind of transitivity, and I say that they'll say, how many shared friends do you have, right? Not like, do you have 2 shared friends, 3 shared friends, n shared friends, right? So it's, and in some ways, if you have lots of shared friends, your friendship might be stronger than if you just have one shared friend. But one of the things in terms of modeling it is, if you have a large network and you're trying to model just transitivity, number of shared friends, and if you have a feature for 1 shared friend, 2 shared friend, and you're trying to learn a weight, you have lots of parameters to learn, and you could potentially put some constraint in this overall kind of shape of how many shared friends you have, right? That once the probability of you forming a link when you have lots of shared friends might become higher as the number of shared friends increase, but they might be in some kind of diminishing return. So you might want to put a nonlinear constraint, and that's something to make your model more sparse. So and that's also kind of existing work that has been done by Mark Hancock at University of Washington. Actually, we're looking at putting a nonlinear function that maps these parameters to a lower dimensional space, so that you can do something like a diminishing return.
And how does he choose the nonlinear function, and how sensitive is it to the choice of the nonlinear function?
So again, you basically kind of parameterize it with this certain multiplicative rate and also another geometric rate parameter, and you're learning those parameters so you can actually learn the shapes as well. And what we are trying to do is an extension beyond that, is that we don't actually have the networks. We're not measuring network statistics. We're measuring conversations, and we want to actually infer the network structure from our observed variables. And so we basically have a hidden model where now also we have 2 different features which we characterize. One is the structural features that are very common in network in terms of the density and transitivity, but we also have observation feature of how much time do you spend in conversation, and what's your kind of behavioral profile. Are you a very talkative person, right? What's your kind of general chattiness in terms of feature, and also how much time do you spend in conversation, and looking at tying those features as well as the structural features. So we're looking at one of the observation features. It would be time spent in conversation, how many minutes you spend in conversation. Again, you can kind of bin it into certain kind of histograms of how much you spend time in conversation. And again, you can constrain it that if you spend an hour after that, it doesn't really matter. If you spend 5 hours, there is a diminishing return in terms of the strength of a link. Okay, so basically, as Jennifer, you were mentioning, so we do have the weights of each histogram is kind of defined this way. I will actually go through this. So you have one kind of rate parameters. So you have a rate parameter theta r and also a multiplicative weight, which you're trying to learn from your data. And also you can just have a linear cost. For example, one could say there is a cost of spending time in a conversation. And given your observation, what you're trying to do is learn these weights, and given the weights that you can learn, you can actually learn different shapes. So you're not actually specifying, because that would be that would require a lot more knowledge than we do have. So you're trying to actually basically learn. And one of the what we learned end up in is that if you think about the probability of you spend the minute spent in conversation, given you have a social tie and you don't. This is basically what we learn from our data automatically. In our data set, this is kind of the shape of the most socially significant time in conversation. So you can kind of see, and this is a characteristic of our data, right? We don't have a lot of data for lots and lots of long conversations. So there, it kind of peaks and then kind of goes down, right? So the probability that if you have a social tie, that the kind of peak is at around 20 minutes. And then obviously the amount of time, if you don't have a social tie, you might have a few sporadic, yeah. Or in this case, basically it's saying whether there is you infer a link or not. Just a connection between.
Would it be the same thing if they have long conversations?
In terms of, so what?
He's
sorry.
asking, is there some other measure of social tie besides the length of conversation? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so there is, so you're trying to learn, you're trying to infer the probability kind of a tie existing given conversation, as well as the structural features of the density and the transitivity. So all of those, you're defining the joint probability as well as the chattiness of the person in general, right? So you have certain behavioral features of the individual and certain properties of the network structure. Okay. Yes?
So this is the actual results?
Yeah.
So when is it cut off in terms of what you consider as a conversation? It seems like the probability of a conversation, you know, I mean, it goes to zero, but it goes to zero. It's pretty slight probability of any conversation for more than 40 minutes. I know I've spoken to people here in the last 3 days for more than 40 minutes, but I'm sure there's been some small break in between, maybe a minute, 2 minutes, maybe a coffee. So how much, is there a fixed amount that's a break that's considered a break?
Oh, okay.
Or is that break proportionate to the length of the conversation, such that, you know, if we were talking for 50 minutes and we have a 5-minute break, but then we return talking, it feels like a very small break in the conversation, whereas if I talk to you for 10 minutes and then it's a 5-minute break, it would seem like it's a qualitatively different conversation than.
Yeah, and we see that in our data. So what we do in our inference about conversation, we make a decision every 20 seconds. So you can actually see a gap. If there's a 20-second gap, you would see but we actually do some smoothing on top of that. But anything above a minute, if you have a gap, it actually segments it into a separate conversation. So you're absolutely right, that phenomenon is in effect here. And you can deal with it by, it's really, really hard to define a conversation, which we kind of, like when two people are in a conversation, a third person joins in, is this the same conversation, or do you label it as a different conversation? If you go back, if you're office mates, you start talking about something, then go back and check your email and start talking about different things, should it be same or different conversation? We don't have the answer, and we just made a kind of heuristic way that we're not going to try to make that decision, and we're just going to make a uniform decision every time that if there is a break of more than 1 minute, it's a separate conversation, because we don't have the knowledge to make that decision.
That's not really fair. So you're distinguishing between a conversation and an event.
Yes.
So like, well, what if it's 3 or 5
Yeah,
minutes break?
yeah.
Well, that might be a full event, but it's a different conversation.
Yep.
So that's
Yep.
cool. I like the thing.
Okay, so from now also given that we can actually infer, so we're looking at a distribution over the graph, and we can also find what's the most likely graph, and from that we can also look at things like centrality, measures of centrality. And that's another thing that we actually look at is infer the graph and looking at centrality, and specifically we looked at closeless centrality because it's more robust than betweenness centrality in terms of outliers, and there's some sociological work that shows that these are indicative of leadership traits, and there's some work I think from the 1970s that look at that people who have high betweenness or closeness centralities are perceived as leader. So we kind of chose that, mostly being influenced by that. And one of the things that we looked at is, so from that we can actually build, so this network structure is showing these 24 individuals mapped in a circle where a central person is in the middle, and then they radially go out. And I'll actually come back to that, but basically this is showing you what's the most what the network graph that we inferred that was most likely in terms of, and
the size is how much they talk, or
I will come back to the size. So right now I haven't explained what the size is, and and you can see the links which are in light gray. But in terms of what and a lot of the discussions that came out is what we measure is how do we know that we have measured the right network. And the closest thing we can do is look at surveys, right? Because we're not collecting ground truth 24/7. And we asked them collaboration. So at the end of the week, they were asked about collaboration, about research and coursework, and also actually this, we also had a thing of who are the people, have you interacted with this person face to face, just socially? And also we have some data which we haven't used about do you interact with them over email and IM. But this is not absolute ground truth, so we are expecting some agreement, but it's kind of a noisy observation of the same network. That's kind of what we get. So if we look at the inferred network with the survey data, we get about 75% agreement, right? And if we looked at just kind of a random network which had the same density of our learned network, so we are actually helping the random network in a way that from based on our conversation data, actually giving it the same density, we get about 64% agreement. So being able to add some of the kind of combining the structural and behavioral information gives us better agreement, but it doesn't go beyond if we just did a simple threshold. That much beyond. It's like 71 versus 75. It's about 4%. And the simple conversation, basically, we put a simple threshold saying if you spend more than 1 minute in conversation, there is a link. I think it was about 5 minutes in conversation. So, but one of the reasons we're interested, even though the simple, even if the results are close, one of the reasons that we are interested in kind of looking at modeling it the way we do is to have parameters that in some ways are interpretable, right? The one that I looked at, like the social time and time spent in conversation, to actually have parameters and weights that might in some way be useful to sociologists or to be able to interpret what's going on in the network, whereas a simple threshold doesn't get us there. And the other thing that we also looked at is tying it back to the micro level behavioral properties. So right now we're looking at inferring the link based on just conversations, but given a conversation we capture things like speaking rate and pitch and how they go back and forth, and what we can then do is measure how people change when they come and talk to a given individual. So in this case, let's say Y is an individual. He or she has multiple conversations, and for each characteristics, let's say turn-taking pattern or pitch, what we do is how much does X change from their average behavior when they come and talk to Y. And then we do an average of that. So how much do all the people who come talk change their behavior when they come and talk to Y? And surprisingly, one of the is that people who were more central cause others to have more, not cause, it's related. We see a correlation of higher behavioral change. So in terms of very, very low level behavior, in terms of how they change their pitch, their rate of, and the turn taking length, that there is actually a correlation between how they change and their network position in terms of their centrality. So we're looking at average change. Oh, if the individual only talks to one person, yeah. In that case, we don't know. We actually did do a check for it that there is no one in our network that only talks to one person.
Right, but in general,
but yes.
Talking to, I mean, this way of measuring correlation may be just a way of measuring the inverse of your degree. Because if I'm talking to 10 people and I expect
you have more variance.
I expect to be a little bit more variant.
No, but she's talking about the other way, I think. She's saying if you are central, other people deviate more from their average when they talk to you.
Yeah.
Than
Yeah. So, and this is basically what the size and the colors were showing. So it's showing how much do others, what's the incoming change. So the bigger and the redder the person is, the more incoming change. So the others change their behavior more. So you can see the most central person is not the person with the greatest change, but slightly off, but there is a correlation. So it's not a perfect match, but it is a significant, like statistically significant correlation in terms of, and you can see people who are in the periphery don't cause that much, have very little incoming change.
Did you look at the other side, at what Madhu was talking about, that the people who are central, are they adapting a lot, or are they pretty much always the same? Just the inverse.
Yeah, so we actually did that, and that's something we are going to do in this work, but in a previous study we actually looked at that, and this was part of my kind of thesis work. Actually what we did was did the same thing in terms of modeling network, but what we looked at is if you look at a conversation, how much do you need to weight the individual models to fit that conversational profile, just in terms of turn taking. So there you actually are looking at how much people change their own behavior or maintain their own or start adapting to the other person's behavior. And in this case, we actually did see that more central, the central people are more stable. So they don't change their behavior as much. And that was just looking at turn taking. So one of the things we're also we're happy that we have two data sets that one collected at MIT and one collected at University of Washington that shows these behavioral features do matter. But we're also trying to kind of make comparisons between the two as well. And
so far, centrality is correlated with rate of change when people talk to central figure. But centrality is really centrality in the graph. There is no mapping yet between centrality and any role taking in real life.
No. No.
So, I mean, I find it a little surprising because I might have thought that, like, somebody who doesn't talk that much, like an Asperger's type person, would be kind of on the not very central to the network, and yet would always talk in the same way. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I expected to hear. Oh, that these people who communicate very little, like, always communicate the same way. So
that's an interesting observation. We don't know kind of if you're thinking about that Asperger profile, right, where they fall. We don't do any screening for that. So it's a good observation in terms of how can we do a finer kind of categorization of our subjects. Right now we just treat them all the same, and maybe there could be, yeah. It possibly could be, but
Right.
we.
I would think in the kinds of samples you were looking at, you would find some, so it would be.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Just more of a range of social skills, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to actually really look at, kind of a lot more of the variability in the conversational style, or even try to do, one of the things we want to do is kind of group those conversations, and maybe some individuals do have more variability than others, something we haven't done yet, but we actually do want to kind of go beyond just looking at the links to actually have links that are characterized by conversation types, not just presence and absence. Yeah.
So if you want to compare who's more central,
Mm-hmm.
who's central people, then there should be a problem, because someone is central, people speak on average more time to them, so their average is high. So you have two central people.
Who are interacting with each other.
Yeah, their overall average conversation length is longer than usual because they're central.
Mm-hmm.
How
do you compare the two central individuals? Well, in this, we have all the data. We haven't kind of looked at the actually comparing. We don't have that many central people of data, but you can actually go and further break it down in terms of the types of conversations they have to try to see if there is different types of central people. We haven't not done that, but there's a lot of kind of data we already have in terms of how long they speak, what places they speak. I actually haven't even looked at the location of conversations at all. We actually have that, what is the type of place they interact in. So possibly there is that you could look in.
very interested in this ranking.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
these papers.
Yeah.
Most influential.
Yeah, so in this case, all we are so far saying is that the more central you are, the more you change, others change, right? So if you're comparing two central person, are you the one who is doing, are others changing their behavior more than you or not, right? So that's the simplest thing.
Two central, first of all, they'll speak the same time. I mean, when they converse.
Yes, but when you're looking at that, you're actually looking at how the average of all the other people who are talking to you, right? So if you're saying that do more people change their behavior when they talk to you versus others? That's the simplest thing you can do from the analysis that we have done. Yep.
So I think a lot of these questions would be answered by two plots.
Okay.
One plot is the variance of one's conversation over one's centrality. So as people are more central, do they have greater variance such that it would be harder to deviate from that? Or maybe that plot over the number of conversation partners that you have. First of all, we don't really know how the distribution of the variance here. And the second is dyad pairs, and plotting dyad pairs over, and taking the dyad pair rather than the individual's unit of analysis, and then plotting their difference in centrality over their difference from their average speaking style. So that dyad pairs that are very asymmetric, is there going to be a lot of change? Dyad pairs that are very symmetric, is there going to be a lot of change? So just getting sort of
that's a good point. Yeah.
Out like that. Is it going to tilt up? Is it going to tilt down?
That's a good.
I mean, I'm backwards. So these sorts of plots give you a distribution of the sense of this, because otherwise, I think what we're doing is sort of reifying the factoid.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's a good observation, and we do actually have the variances in not a nice plot kind of thing, but yeah, it's an excellent suggestion. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to now digress a bit in terms of talking a little bit about some of the other stuff that I've been working on. So what next? In terms of the challenges of learning from sensor data, one of the things that we are working on is really how to engage the user and help a learning system evolve over time, right? So right now we're building models of conversations, but as I mentioned before, I'm looking also at activities and places and things. aspects of behavior, and not two people. People are very different, right? Two people. Most people are like, they might have commonalities, but they have their own kind of flavor. And eventually, our goal is that your cell phone will know a lot about you, and you have models of your behavior and can help you achieve your goals. But to get there,
Cell phone is coach.
Exactly, cell phone is your life coach, but it needs to come with certain understanding of human behavior, but it needs to learn from its user and evolve over time, and it needs to do that without driving the user kind of crazy. So what we're actually looking at is, right now it's very, very tedious to train these models. A lot of these models are supervised. You collect some data, you label it, or graduate students label it, and then and then you learn, and then you give it to your grandma, and it breaks because you walk differently from an aging elderly person. But it might be enough to bootstrap so that it knows maybe you're possibly walking, and try to combine the information and maybe prompt you when it's most useful, when it's most uncertain, or when it thinks something new is happening. And the other benefit with mobile phones and devices is millions of people are using it. And if millions of people gather sensor data and we can profile them in terms of types, we can actually also benefit in terms of learning based on groupings of individuals. Can we build a phone that shares data from active people who go hiking and have a better model of all the different activities they're doing versus someone maybe who is spends most of their time like going to museums and cultural events, right? So there are different flavors of people, and can we actually group them and learn from them over time and share information between them to help our algorithms. So that's kind of something that, and actually looking at really, I haven't talked much about the activity stuff in terms of, I also looking at just simple physical activity. Do you take the stairs or do you take the elevators, or do you go for a bike? What kind? Do you cook at home, and how much time do you spend in meetings and things? And really trying to do some experiments in terms of understanding what profiles, behavioral profiles, can help in terms of different quality of life metrics.
This is a really naive question, but can my cell phone, I'm carrying it, tell that I'm cooking? I mean, can the accelerometer say, oh, she looks like she's beating eggs? Or
so we've done, so I will actually...
No, but seriously,
yes.
I mean, how many different kinds of behavior can...
Yes. So how many we don't know yet, right? We're still, but we did actually do things like so combination of sound and movement. We've looked at doing cooking, watching TV, vacuuming, like doing laundry. So we have actually kind of looked at seeing if we can do certain classes of activity, again guided by these activities of daily living. But yes. Then what if you do something new? It's always the case. We did this kind of physical fitness experiment where we had things about different machines in the gym. We had information about taking stairs, biking. But then exactly happened. Someone said that, oh, I do a lot of vacuum. I vacuum my house every day, and I should get credit for that. Or the other one was yeah, there was, and a lot of people complain about the pedometer not giving credit for taking stairs. Which is, if you take the stairs, you are actually doing more intense activity. So, but the other was dancing. I go out dancing and your system doesn't detect. And those are the cases I think you do need to notice when something new is happening and potentially incorporate that. But you can do a wide range. So looking at combining location. So if you can say this is the city center where there is shops and restaurants and cafes and bookstores, that can constrain the possible options, and then your movement.
I'm not going to be vacuuming in the city center.
Exactly. Or you wouldn't be walking around in a restaurant, but you will be at a shop. And then looking at the sound, you will probably have a lot more kind of conversations at a restaurant. A bookstore will be quieter. So combination of those sensing can help you differentiate the different types of behavior. So what we are actually about to do in like 2 weeks. So at Dartmouth there is a medical school affiliated with the medical school. There's an elder care facility called Kendall, which is populated by mostly retired Dartmouth professors and others who are really interested in volunteering for experiments. So we're actually doing an experiment with actually a doctor at Dartmouth where we are looking at measuring their physical activity and social isolation. So social isolation is a big problem in elderly people. If your spouse dies and you become isolated, you become depressed, and then it actually triggers cognitive decline. Similarly for physical activities. And what we are going to do is measure their behavior for a period of 2 weeks, and a combination of couples and people who are widowed or single, as well do standard surveys. So there are these physical activity surveys, there's depression scale surveys to actually measure, try to understand, can we actually have predictors from behavior that correlate well with surveys. And basically I think that it can have impact both at an individual level, that you raise awareness, just the fact that someone, a lot of people say that they don't even know how much they walk, right? The pedometer is one step towards that, but also looking at kind of family and caregiver. A lot of elderly, their family members take care of them, and there is a huge burden in terms of a lot of people actually quit their jobs to take care of aging parents. So if you could have a monitoring and automated alert system, but also the doctor I work with also does a lot of public health, and they say that it's really try to understand and measure like health outside the doctor's office and how different factors affect the well-being is very poorly understood. And even just how much physical activity someone does, does the person have a lot of social connection, is really hard to get, and really affects a person's health. And that's some of the things that we're looking at. So, and the kind of goal is that we should be able to kind of increase access to care over time, improve the quality, and actually make it much more cost effective. So that's a kind of digression of the thread of work I do, and that's it. And obviously I have my main graduate students that have done a tremendous. Danny Wyatt is the one at University of Washington who's doing a lot of work on the social network stuff, and my collaborators who have been involved in the various aspects in terms of the medical side and also the device side. So thank you. Yep.
So it seems that, I mean, there's a lot of sensing that we can do. Already we are doing a lot, and I think the big challenge seems to be how to process the data that we can get and see if it has information of the kind that we want. I mean, given this, I mean, is there a case where you sort of notice that, oh, I wish I could get this kind of data, rather than saying, I have all this data, can I now see what it says?
I think one of the I think being able to use a cell phone is a big advantage in terms of getting people's buy-in. People already carry a cell phone. People hate carrying extra stuff, which we had the problem, especially with elderly people. Like you can pay a student to carry it, but if we wanted to kind of say carry this for a year to someone who is not being kind of paid to participate in a study, it's cumbersome. So I think the fact that phones are in a state that you can actually do a lot of the sensing is great. But I think the challenge is on the processing. How do you take these raw sensor traces and get higher level information that's useful by individual and in some ways predictive, I think is the challenge. But I'm biased, that's what I work on, so. Yep.
I mean, one of the great things about this is that we can actually measure things frequently. I mean,
oh yeah, continuously.
You can only do like every once a month or so for content traces. So I was wondering, I mean, have you looked at...
I'm going to actually play, sorry, while you're asking question, this is kind of an application that we're envisioning in terms of, oops, okay, sorry, so that you can see a little bit of what we have in mind. So this will show you the types of thing you could do on a phone in terms of individual behavior and categorization. So I'll let it play while I answer your question.
Okay, so the question I have is like, have you looking at when networks form, it would be nice to have frequent data about this. But so have you looked at applications where you actually look at people? Maybe your grad students would actually work if you would have a bigger population. When people initially kind of make these random connections to people until finally, it crystallizes sort of a certain type of network. Because that would kind of make really use of this technology that you can do frequent
Yes.
measurements rather than because for a snapshot, it's not clear to me that other techniques like surveys and so on, don't give you similar results. And
That's
for getting frequent updates, it's actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're currently working on is a temporal kind of evolution of the network model to look at the kind of the temporal dynamics. But you're absolutely right. So in the beginning, one of the things is that how do you take even noisy audio measurement and group people into conversations reliably? They're not close talking microphones. They're microphones that are kind of clipped onto their kind of pocket or shoulder strap. So there was a lot of kind of initial challenges in terms of are these models going to be good enough that we were challenged? But you're absolutely right that what we want to do is scale up and look at kind of the evolution and temporal trends. And with the activities, we are doing a lot of that. We're looking actually at routines and behavior temporal models. With the social network, we're just about kind of starting to do like looking at the evolution in terms of time. So exactly what you're saying, we're trying to look at these kind of, or even just the probability of you forming a link could be high at the beginning and then it kind of tapers off, right? So can we actually look at how the model evolves over time, which is not homogeneous, which is oftentimes a lot of probabilistic or assume a Markov process, but can we actually learn the pattern?
The other thing is, I think was already asked, sorry about the second question, that there was this, user characteristics. For example, Bruce Cesarot at Dartmouth did a study on email networks and found that, because students are randomly assigned, and so you could look at the effect of geography on, how African Americans, for example, talk to non-African Americans, and looking at the effects of discrimination. So I was wondering if this is also something you could maybe apply this to, because it would be interesting to see, whether people from different, say, groups are, avoiding each other initially when they meet, or is this something that they somehow are worse in keeping up relationships? These are all kind of things you could do by frequent measurements. Absolutely, and one of the things we're trying to look at in the elder care study is that people who are in certain groups or activity groups, do they tend to be more physically or mentally alert, and are there trends, and if they participate in a group but they're actually doing the activities as well through measurements, and that's exactly what we're looking at in the kind of elder care study.
Can you say something about the rough learning algorithm?
The what?
The algorithm for learning the graph.
Oh, okay. So the algorithm for the graph was used mostly using MCMC. So we're using kind of Markov chain Monte Carlo, but we're looking at caching some samples to make it efficient. It is really, really slow otherwise. And we also have to do the exponential random graph in terms of the parameters. They have certain degeneracies. So we're actually putting some priors on the model so that to avoid such things. But in terms of the actual learning process, it's primarily variations and tweaking of MCMC.
Meaning that you do maximum likelihood.
Yeah, maximum likelihood estimate. Yeah, using MCMC. Yep.
It sounds like a great thing for nice people. So I can't see myself, Smash Friday night, hanging around. There seems like of the activities for well-being that a person would want to improve would be the ones they'd be least likely to want to have recorded.
Well, that's an excellent point, I think. So there is a whole area of work which I don't work on in terms of persuasive technology, right? So how do you actually take this information and present it? Persuasive. So how do you actually, so for example, one of the things my colleague did, again, so she built a fitness kind of a device, a fitness phone in terms of how it would give you feedback. And what she did was instead just made it a background screen, which is a flower garden on your phone. all it did was populate the flower garden based on your activity. So you didn't have any social stigma that your friends who saw your phone would know, because you are the only one who knows what this. To everyone else, it's a flower garden, a background screen, right? And then you could choose to share it, but actually what she did is measured that there is a difference in terms of activity level from people who actually got some feedback in this way versus a control group. So and there were actually people, I think she screened for people who were overweight and wanted already had a weight problem and was interested in losing weight. So I agree, it is a challenging issue of how do you convey the information. Oftentimes, if someone have a problem, they're much more motivated. But some people are just interested in getting the information as well. So when a lot of our subjects, they wanted to just see their data, and maybe that might be a way of nudging them into good behavior.
So yeah, he wants to know what you're not including on the Tanzine screen.
Did I hopefully it shows me being super active or something. And this is actually showing that you could actually have a real-time map. This was for our doctors in terms of this is showing people who are similar to you. So the intensity is mapping people's behavior who is similar to you. So if you wanted to do some kind of community-based assessment, you can actually look at people who are behaviorally similar. Yes?
Now for your links, you can probably tell whether they are sort of hetero or homosexual, right? Because so people might be not comfortable with that either.
That's true. So I think there's a lot of things. So, in the end, we are giving it to people who want to use it in the way they want to use it. And eventually, if you want to share some data, you have to explicitly authorize sharing that data, right? So what we want to do is show the benefits, make it possible, and give you control. But definitely, there is many ways it could be abused. And something I think will be addressed as a combination of giving people control, having proper policies in place also in terms of using the data. For example, in healthcare, there is no guidelines of how you can use the data, right? And a lot of these devices aren't FDA approved. And actually, I saw one nurse who uses accelerometer for COPD. FDA approved accelerometer only costs $450, which is crazy. And they give you a sample once per second, which is a really crappy accelerometer for $450. But it takes enormous cost of making something FDA approved. So also there is a lot of I think applications in the consumer and also kind of family caregiving network as well.
Could you clarify this example that you just mentioned? I don't know what POCP is, and I wonder if the device that you're talking about with the accelerometer, is it just added to the cell phone?
No, the device that I was talking about was a standalone. Pardon? Standalone device that was just accelerometer is trying to detect movement. So it's used to actually they're trying to characterize gaits, and apparently a severe attack in terms of COPD can be predicted by certain change in gait patterns.
Chronic obstructive
pulmonary disorder. Sorry. I thought it was the. Thank you.
Without an iPhone. I know it because I was diagnosed with it. Too much smoking.
So I helped start the first virtual reality crusade in the early 90s, and so we worked with all kinds of sensors, including accelerometers, etc. And the question is about, is this a hybrid of Converge of both the accelerometers and GPS, so that you have,
I combine things. Actually, a lot of it is actually kind of figuring out automatically which sensors to use. I work with audio, GPS, accelerometer, as well as certain environmental cues in terms of light. So, for example, the sensors that help best differentiate between walking and taking stairs is a combination of accelerometer and barometric pressure, because you see elevation change. And whether someone is standing or taking an elevator. So we actually, because one of the approaches we were trying to is that you have these basket of sensors from which you can extract features, can you automatically pick out which ones are relevant? And that was very interesting in terms of, and which was great because people who wear pedometer always complains that, oh, I walked 6 flights of stairs and I got like the same number of step counts. So they were like completely like over the moon when it could detect like taking the stairs.
One other short question as that part of that, because you said that another example, when this is on and you're tracking somebody that, I mean, you're seeing some evidence of some like-minded people, because the implicit statement is that they're okay about that. They're putting themselves in that list. However, is there a very easy, on-the-fly toggle on-off for the locator?
Right now, no, because we're not at that kind of. We're mostly kind of in the designing the algorithms, and this is kind of more as a demo platform, right? So there is nothing technically in the way that wouldn't let you do that, but currently it's not there.
So when you finally map up these correlation to really social, in a social context, this is very culturally dependent, right? So, because for instance, if you go to the Byzantine Empire, the emperor didn't speak, he had a personal, because it wasn't beneath him to communicate power. Or even in my lifetime, right, when I was small, being obese was a sign of prosperity.
The what?
A sign of prosperity.
What was it?
Being obese was a sign of
Oh, being obese. Yeah, that's.
You had the means to feed yourself, and you were not doing manual labor with the burn those calories.
Yeah.
So nowadays, being obese is socially correlated with different socioeconomic strata, and so it's still in a small span we can swing. So the question really is, because you can record these things, can you go instead reverse this whole process and try to infer where social changes change rather than
I'm sure you can, right? So my goal is to have the technology at a stage that you can do that. You can actually have system and that will be able to detect a lot of the interesting trends in a person's life and be able to kind of adapt over time so that it doesn't just, if something changes, it completely breaks down and say, I have never seen this before, and can kind of evolve. So that's kind of what my work has been focused on, is really being able to do very, very rich behaviors longitudinally, continuously, so that you can do a lot of such studies. I would say right now there isn't that study because the technology is just kind of evolving.